Somebody once said that when you discover your purpose in life, you never work again, because your purpose becomes your play. And you've been on my mind ever since I was confirmed to be here, because one can really break out into philosophy and big theories and on all the likes. And I thought how best it would be for me to share my journey, particularly with addiction, and to put a context to it, just to give a brief background. I'm originally from Guatemala in the East End, born and bred to a very poor family, a family of 7. Any Guatemalans in the house? Hola, ha. Abum joined to a born and bred in the East End, and left this country 1982, went underground. There's an African saying that says, "Oos ves, days best," that you never truly appreciate your country until you go miles away. And for me, having left South Africa and gone outside, I began to appreciate South Africa from the outside. And my whole desire was to want to come back to South Africa to help utilize what I've gained abroad for the sole purpose of advancing the cause of our liberation and our freedom. It's a privilege for me to be here, and it's a joy. If I'm not in a corporate environment, I'm in a community environment. I have young people that I'm mentoring. I've got, I work in the political sphere. My passion in my heart is manufacturing. Karl Marx talks about controlling the means of production. And ever since I was at university, I was at UCLA, I was funded by the United Nations, and I went in that particular institution. I must tell you, I was the first in my family to graduate from the university. And from there, we broke the mold of no degrees in the Mariri clan. And now you come to my clan, there's degrees everywhere, And I said, we must take the notch up. Now we must be millionaires, so the upcoming generation will break that mold. I'm serious. And it's a privilege for me to be amongst such greatness. Look at your neighbor, please tell them you are simply the best. And give them a Colgate smile, yes. Yeah. So I thought, let me share my journey with you. I'd like to begin with a story. It's a beautiful story. Just on the manufacturing aspect, we've got 3 companies that we run. One is we're in partnership with a group called Avenge Manufacturing, where we manufacture sleepers, concrete sleepers, and pipes and poles and culverts and things like that. The second one, we manufacture plastic. What's written on your Coca-Cola bottle, Coca-Cola, it's actually on a plastic product called BOPP film. We melt plastic, little pallets that we buy from the likes of Sasol and Safripol, and we melt it at high degree temperature, and we stretch it. And it can be 2 millimeter in thickness, and that's what gets printed on Coca-Cola, the silver lining inside your Simba chips. It's my product that we manufacture. And then we have a company called Rock Fiber, where we have a minority stake of about 30%, and it's a fascinating, we melt rock and turn it into insulation, and it gets bought by the likes of Hitachi, who then converts it and makes it into, Eskom, when they build boilers, they will use our product to insulate. We can produce this thickness or the thickness that starts from that roof all the way to here on the floor. A beautiful story has been told, and it is a story of an eagle and a chicken. One day, an eagle lost an egg, and as fate would have it, the chicken found the egg. Like any concerned parent, the chicken took the egg home, and it sat on it, and it gave it the love and the warmth and the care of an incipient mother. 2 weeks later, that egg hatched, and out stepped a beautiful eagle. That eagle had eagle history. It had eagle genes. It had eagle chromosomes. It had eagle power, and it had eagle potential. But because it grew up in chicken surroundings, that eagle lost a sense of personal identity. It wanted so much to look like the chickens in the barnyard. And interestingly enough, the chickens in the barnyard, they knew the identity of this eagle. So the chickens had a bosperat, an imbizo, a private meeting independent of the eagle. And they began to discuss amongst themselves as chickens and said, we've got to keep this eagle thinking it's a chicken. Because the day it ever finds out it's an eagle, it will rule over us. So that eagle grew up with an inferior complex. At one stage, that eagle considered cosmetic surgery. Going to the hospital, getting rid of its beautiful feathers so it can skip and jump like the chickens in the barnyard. But one day, telecommunications, that eagle was playing in the barnyard. And as it was playing, lo and behold, it gazed upward. And it saw a full adult eagle caught in full flight, navigating the yonder skies, and that eagle's mind in the barnyard was blown. And it said to itself, wow, I sure wish I could be like that. Well, that eagle in the sky perceived the dilemma in which this eagle in the barnyard was, and it flew right across time to come and wake this eagle up and said, boy, you are not a chicken, you're an eagle. Your eye was not meant just to look at the tree trunks, and your mighty paws were not meant to kill the cat. But you are not a chicken, but you're an eagle. Well, sometimes as I travel across the lengths and breadth of this country, I see nothing but eagles who've abdicated their responsibility to soar like eagles, and they've relegated themselves to chicken citizenship. We play chicken games, have chicken dreams, and develop chicken ambitions. But with my little presentation here today, I've come to nudge you, to challenge you, to say it is time to soar once again. Because judging by the energy that's within this room, I believe that you possess the capacity and the capability to achieve anything that you would like to achieve. So look at your neighbor, please tell them, I'm not a chicken, I'm an eagle. You know, one of my favorite programs on television has got to be nature programs. And one day I was watching Net Geo Wild, and they were chronicling the life of an eagle. And I didn't know about an eagle. They said if an eagle loses one of its eyes, it's as good as dead. But if both eyes are fully functional, when that eagle locks its particular eyes on a particular prey, there is absolutely nothing that could deter that eagle from reaching its destination. And therefore, I'd like to humbly submit that when you begin to focus on what you need to get done, there is nothing that will stand in your way from achieving what you need to ever achieve. So when you go out here and you go to your respective rooms and frolic around the campus, remember that you possess the inner capability to achieve anything that you like to achieve. In that story is a story of my life, because at one stage I felt my horizons were prefixed. I felt I could only achieve up to so far, and therefore I literally wallowed in my shame and I drowned in my own misery. But somebody once said that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And my stars came when I came into contact with the writings of the late Stephen Bantu Biko, who wrote quite extensively, but in the book called I Write What I Like, he talks about the philosophy of black consciousness. It was like I underwent a rediscovery of myself, and I began to realize the old cliche was correct. If you can dream it, you can achieve it. And therefore, I want to challenge you that be a dreamer, be a visionary. The Bible that I read, it says, those that wait upon the Lord, they will mount up war. Tony Campolo wrote extensively in one of the books that he writes. He talks about human behavior. I want to tell my story today because I don't want to be philosophical, but I want to tell my story. But Tony Campolo wrote a book. In one of the books, he talks about human behavior. And he says people need to do many things, but three things I took away from him. Number one, Tony Campolo says people need to take risks. Life is all about taking calculated risks. Somebody once said that good things come to those who wait. I said, well, it might be true for you, but not for me, because they will only get those things that are left by those who hustle, those who make things happen. So take calculated risks. But number two, Tony Campolo says we need to laugh a lot more. I have a philosophy and a principle that governs my life, and that is I work hard, but by the same token, I play hard. Please repeat. Dr. Mlapo likes saying this one. Please repeat after me. When I die, I want to be thoroughly used up. I like that one, So everything I was designed to do, when I check out of this world, I want to make sure that it's actually done. But number three, Tony Campolo says we need to leave a legacy behind. I like the way Frantz Fanon in his book called The Wretched of the Earth puts it. He says, never forget where you come from and always remember the bridges that carried you over. Must remember that somebody had to bleed and die to provide an opportunity for where you sit. Therefore, you have a moral obligation to leave this community, this country far better than when you found it. Dr. King puts it well when he says life is interrelated. He says we are caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied up in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. You can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And strangely enough, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. So there's a sense of interdependentness. We need each other. And when you leave a legacy behind is, what do you want people to say about you when you check out of this world? Do you want people to pretend to cry crocodile tears when you leave the university that they're going to miss you? Meanwhile, on the other side of town, there's a party organized in celebration of your departure. Or do you want people saying that you've left such a high standard on the campus that that standard is used as a benchmark for anybody who's coming into the equation? Yes, let me just share my story and I sit down. I've got a few minutes. You know, one of the things, three mentors I had when I lived in the U.S. I grew up in a very conservative environment. My parents went to a church called Dutch Reform, which I never understood as a child why they would go to such an environment during apartheid. But be that as it may, it was a very conservative environment, and my upbringing was incredibly conservative. We were taught the values of life. We were taught to respect, to honor, to care, to be sympathetic, to empathize with people. So I grew up with strong quality values. And when I left this country with Dr. Mulapo, by the way, we left together, and I didn't want to come back home. And when I was overseas, the special branch kept knocking on my door, and I had to move. We went to a place called Huntsville, Alabama, and I had to leave Huntsville and go to Los Angeles. You know, I remember when we got to Los Angeles, our first entrance into the U.S. was Los Angeles, and we slept on a bus bench, by the way. And in front of us there was a sign written UCLA. You know, and instinctively I told myself that one day I will graduate from that institution. How, I did not know. I was picked up by a lady called Mrs. Butler. She had 6 kids of her own. She was literally a mentor to me. She taught me property. She was a woman who was uneducated, didn't go to school, but she knew property. She lives now currently at a place called Diamond Bar. A house just in Diamond Bar, there's no house that costs less than $3-4 million US. And this woman who's uneducated, I lived with her. She taught me how to drive. At the time, I think I was just turning 18 years old, and I was a hustler, you know, looking for opportunities and things like that. I remember I went to a place called Los Angeles City College, and I registered, and I had to work. I had 3 jobs that I had to work, and every time I would phone my mother, I would pick up a phone, because very closest person I was to was my mother, and I'd pick up a phone. She said, how you doing? I said, oh mom, I'm in Hollywood, I'm seeing all celebrities. And when I hang up the phone, tears will come down my cheek, because I couldn't tell her the true nature of my situation. I was poor, I had absolutely nothing. I was cleaning Mrs. Butler's house, and she taught me how to drive, and I registered at a place called Los Angeles City College, and I remember after registering at that institution, 5 months later, after 5 months, they came with a letter and said, look, you didn't pay your fees, so you can't write exams. You know, so I didn't write exams. I could have had a pity party, but I decided I was going to pick myself up. I went to my lecturers and got to my lecturers, and I asked for a report card. I said, you know, as a lecturer, I've been with you for 5 months. Just tell me how I did in your class. And they wrote report cards, and I took those report cards and I sent them, I'll never forget it, to 51 institutions asking for funding. And all of them came back with regret. And I worked at the equivalent of McDonald's, at Wendy's, and at night I was a security guard, and I was a hustler. I started a musical group, and to cut long story short, I got a scholarship eventually from UCLA, and they sent me to UCLA, a degree that took 4 years. You know, now I was hungry for learning. You know, I didn't want the scholarship to be taken away from me, so that degree, you know, which was 4 years in an institution called UCLA with 45,000 students, you know. I told myself I'm going to do it in 3 years. And I was working. I was still a security guard. At night, I used that opportunity to study. And I studied. I graduated with political science and economics, and I did comparative politics. It was incredible. And I graduated. You should have seen me when I was graduating. I couldn't invite my parents. The only person that I could invite was Mrs. Butler and her 5 kids, and only James and Maisha came through. And when they came through, my name was called. And as it was called, when I was a finished product. I was wearing a tie and a suit. I look sumptuous. Yes. And when my name was called, Dr. Makwenzi, you could hear the hand clap was very faint because nobody knew who I was, But when my name was called, my shoulders were sticking out. As I went from where I was sitting to the podium, it was almost a 1-minute walk. And just as I was walking, they were calling another name. So I was just a mere statistic in a sea of people who were graduating. Everybody was seeing a finished product. But they were not seeing a hustler who was struggling, who was sleeping on the streets, who didn't have money to pay for books, who had to lie and change a last name and do this and all kinds of things. They were seeing a finished product. But as I was graduating on behalf of my family. Tears of joy were rolling down my cheeks and said, yes, at UCLA, finally, I graduated. Yeah, I deserve a hand clap. Right? I can think about that day. There's that song that says, never give up. Never throw in the towel. It doesn't matter how hard it is, And some of us come from horrible communities where, the mother and the father are not there. And for you to be at university, it's painstaking. You're wearing 1 pair of shoes, and your neighbor next door has 14 of them. And you still come to school. You're walking and somebody is driving. But you gotta hang in there, my friend. You represent a community behind you. Yes. They don't see the sacrifices that you go through. And I graduated. It's incredible. I graduated. I came home and they threw a party for me. My sister, my firstborn sister, Riseven Kudladle, my firstborn sister stood up and said, you know what? She was, at the time, I think she was in her 40s and she had 3 kids. She was married. She was merely a school teacher, and she decided, and she threw a party and asked me to wear my gown. I hadn't been home for 12 years. I wore my gown, and she threw a speech. And she says, you've broken the cycle of no education in our family. I'm picking myself up as an example of the family. Child number 1, I'm going back to school. She went back to UNISA. And through correspondence, now she has a master's. Can you imagine? In her late 50s. Yes. And I came out, and it's incredible. I always liked the means of production. I came home, I got a job, and I felt the job was not for me. And I worked, and it was not for me. And I decided I want to go into business for myself. I used to go overseas to buy clothing overseas and come back and sell it when it was unpopular. In the early 90s, in 95, that's what I did. I would go to fashion shows in Los Angeles and go to fashion shows in New York and go to fashion shows in Singapore and come back. I targeted the last day of the fashion shows because the last day everybody wanted to get rid of their stock. I'd buy boxes, in a box there's 18 pairs, and I'd buy them for $100, put them in a ship and come home and make some money and have a good time, And my passion was always speaking. Love Mombigi was speaking here at SABC, invited for me to come, and I prepared something on customer service. And after preparing something on customer service, I came. And when I came, it was incredible. There was a lady sitting in the front, Mariri, her name. And after I spoke for 20 minutes, came to me and said, I want to represent you and send you to corporate South Africa. So what does that mean? She said, every time I represent you, I'll be your booking agent. I said, no, cool. Incredible. I love speaking. I speak for free. Now I'm going to get paid for it. And all I have to do is prepare. I couldn't believe it. I went into the speaking circuit. I spoke to various companies in the country. It's incredible. And my reputation was big. And I got a mentor while I was consulting for a company called Avenge. And it didn't start like that. It was a conflict management situation. I was called to intervene to broker the relationship. And when I arrived, That guy was not my mentor at the time. An African gentleman brought me into his office and we built a relationship. A month or 2 months later, that relationship deteriorated. Later, he called me and we resumed the relationship and he became my mentor. He was a CEO. And I valued mentorship because I not only had a spiritual mentor, in the name of the late Pastor Nick Musupi, he spoke into my life about spiritual matters and my destiny. But I also had a business mentor. And the business mentor is that guy who catches a vision about the future and helps you to tag along. I didn't have money when the writing was clearly on the wall that this country was going through transformation. And it was not enough to continue with affirmative action. Now it was black economic empowerment. He called me and said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Sure, I'm interested." But I remember I don't have a dime to my name. He helped me raise 7 million to buy 50% of a factory which was then in the Northern Cape. I knew nothing about concrete sleepers or concrete products, but the bank, through his assistance, they gave me 7 million, and 7 million, we bought 50% of a company that manufactured concrete sleepers. I told my partners, 2 partners, I told them, I said, "Gents, we're not going to spend a dime on anything that we get. We're going to take back that money and pay the bank." Paid the bank. In 3 years, we owned that business. 50% of it, our share, we owned. And I said, "Gents, this is our stepping stone into the future. Nobody buys nice cars. What we're going to do, we're going to take this money and invest it further." Well, through that relationship, I got my hands dirty. I said, "I want to know what is a concrete sleeper." And I got my hands dirty, and through the assistance of this gentleman, I managed to run that factory. And after running that factory, we supplied even Gautrain. When you write Gautrain, Gautrain is running on the sleeper that I produced from my factory. It's incredible, it's incredible. If you've never had money before, like I did, and you come from the hood, like I did, the minute you dangle some cash, instead of me sitting closer to my mentor, I started to say, "I don't need this guy." And that was the beginning of trouble. I was making money. I think my first million I made at the age of 34. Made my first cash million in the bank. So I was making money. First thing that you do, you become pompous and arrogant. And before long, I no longer had somebody who spoke over my life. So I was a be it all and end it all. So before long, I was speaking in top corporate South Africa. I was making money in manufacturing. I had a clothing business. I had a family to run. I needed 28 hours in a day, and I only had 24. And part of that was partying. Another proclivity and tendency I have is the arts. I cooked up shows, wrote scripts, sold them to SABC, and they bought them. So I would do one show at SABC. There's a friend of mine who's Caesar Mulebati. I produced his show. He was in the front on TV. I was behind the scenes because that's where the cash is. You with me? So I became an executive director of almost 3 shows. I cooked a show called In Search of My Roots. And before long, I had all these things giving me some serious capital in the bank. But I was abusing that capital and utilizing it for other things and other purposes. Well, unbeknown to me, I started a tendency to drink alcohol. Now, I have nothing against alcohol, but for me, I started with wine. From wine, I graduated in sweet wine. I graduated and went to what do you call it? To spirits, My first introduction was to Johnny Walker. And I didn't realize that the real Johnny Walker is facing this direction. The Hong Kong one is facing the opposite direction. So eventually I started drinking. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'd gone to speak at a company, and I was invited in a house in Sandton. After speaking, and I went to fellowship with those guys, they said, "What do you drink?" I said, "I drink wine." I was offered wine, and after being offered wine, I did about 6 classes I did. And after 6 classes, I said, no, it was a Tuesday night. I said, no, I'm going home. But before I go home, I'm going to use the loo, just so I don't have to stop on the road. So I got in my car, and driving home, before I got in my car, I asked for the restroom. They told me upstairs to the left, and I went upstairs to the left. Instead of going to the left, I went to the right. And all I could hear was a door shut behind me, and somebody locked, and an argument ensued. How come you didn't lock the door? And I was inside. I was a bit tipsy. And being tipsy, thank you. And being tipsy, I saw two people that I knew very well. And those two people started to argue and say, man, I'm out. And there was a small little table in front, in the middle there. And what I saw, there must have been about 3 girls, possibly half naked. And on the small table, there was every drug imaginable. In recollection, there was methamphetamine, there was crack in rock form, there was cocaine, and there was E and stuff like that, and a bit of alcohol. So the 2 guys that I saw put pressure on me, and tipsy and wanting to go, I said, I'll try something that looks like a cigarette. And it was a crack pipe. And I tried a crack pipe. I coughed the first time, they laughed at me. So I said, who are these guys to laugh at me? I tried it the second and the third time. Must have been about 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I said, gents, I've tried it, I need to go home. Got in my car, drove, and on the N17 on my way home, the drug started to kick in. And when it kicked in, I parked on the side. It was like a new world was open to me. I savored the moment. And I felt such a rush come to my system, I could not believe it. And instead of going home, it must have been about 9:45. I made a U-turn and went back to St. And believe it or not, I got home at about 4:30 in the morning. That was the beginning of my addiction. No mentor, no somebody to speak in my life. I had a little bit of cash. I bought a house in 4 ways through the encouragement of Dr. David Mulapo. Bought a stand for about 3.5 hectares. Built a house. Bought one in Wendywood, and bought one in the East End. Bought one, in the Vaal and things. So things were good. But I tried, and I couldn't understand what is this fuss about cocaine. But a clandestine life was born. I became callous. I became cold. I became manipulative. I operated in a clandestine fashion. I was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For the initial 3 years, I could control everything. I got the rush. You see how energetic I am. 4 days later, I'm still this way, and I hadn't slept one bit. So for the first 3 years, I could control it. I was strong. I was solid. But the last 2 years, that's when the wheels came off. Because can you imagine? God has blessed me with beautiful kids. I've got a son who just turned 11 a couple of days ago, and I've got a daughter who's 16 years old. And the reason why all this happened, I had a boy at university, Sbusiso. He was 17 years old at the time. He was studying food technology, and he was killed, at university. After first year, he spent 5 months, and after 5 months, he comes home. He says, Dad, I found a flat. Please, let's organize it. I said, no problem, my boy. I'll sort it out. I said, I'm going to write. I'm coming back home. He never came home. When I went to Pretoria, he was on life support. And my life felt upside down. On June 16, I switched machines off and watched him pass away. And I had no mentor to speak into my life and somebody to guide me through the process, and my wheels came off. And my kids, I love my children, and they saw me use drugs in their home. I brought drugs into my home. At the height of my addiction, I was spending 8,000 to 10,000 rands a day. I lost weight. I became emaciated. I sold everything that I have. My house in 4 ways, I sold it and I smoked it. My house in Wendywood, I sold it and I smoked it. Got some shares, sold them, smoked them. I lied. I was a pathological liar. I should have been given a best performing award. I'm telling you. And anything I could find, I pawned. I pawned my ring, my wedding ring. I pawned my wife's ring. I pawned my children's toys. I pawned. You know, in the township, I lost weight. I became emaciated. I lost weight. I became dark. You know, in the township, the minute you begin to lose weight, they no longer talk about you. When they see each other, they just look at each other and say, yeah, you know. And some of them, they call it what, Z3, ne? And yeah, you know, I became a talk of the town. I wrote a suicide note and checked into the Grand Hotel by the airport there, bought Johnny Walker, bought drugs, about 6,000-7,000 rands worth, hoping never to wake up, you know. And fortunately, being in the arts, I love music and I love musicians, you know. So my other life is like artistic, you know. Today I was with Solima Mahlangu, you know, and we had nice lunch together. But Hugh Masekela, I worked with him, and Hugh Masekela and Lebo M, you know, because Lebo M was also on alcohol, and I took him off and took him to rehab. You know, bent his first house in America, and he was a nightmare. You know, so they came to my house because they're friends. At 4 o'clock they came to pick me up. Brother Hugh says, you're going to Crescent Clinic, and he said, you look like a UFO, because I was so thin, you know, and my head had swollen, you know, so I really looked like I was, you know, suffering from kwashiorkor. Don't laugh, man. You know, and believe it or not, and they picked me up. I went to Crescent Clinic, checked myself in Crescent Clinic, and 2 weeks I was recovering, and I could feel that I was recovering. And in the middle of the night, I hear my roommate. I hear what? And I wake up and I look through. My roommate was using drugs, and I got a rush to my system. Instead of going to report him, I joined him. You know, so I relapsed in a rehabilitation center, having you know, when they threw a party waiting for me to come home, I was already high like a kite. I couldn't wait to go and score some more drugs. There's a poem I just want to read it for you. It's called "My Name is Cocaine." It kind of sums up what my life became. It says, "My name is Cocaine. Call me Coke for short. I entered this country without a passport. Ever since then, I've made lots of scum rich. Some have been murdered and found in a ditch. I'm more valued than diamonds, more treasured than gold. Use me just once and you too will be sold. I'll make a schoolboy forget his books. I'll make a beauty queen forget her looks. I'll take a renowned speaker and make him a bore. I'll take a mother and make her a whore. I'll make a school teacher forget how to teach. I'll make a preacher not want to preach. I'll take your rent money and you'll get evicted. I'll murder your babies or they'll be born addicted. I'll make you rob and steal and kill. When you are under my power, you have no will. Remember, my friend, my name is Big C. If you try me just one time, you may never be free. I've destroyed actors, politicians, and many a hero. I've decreased bank accounts from millions to zero. I make shooting and stabbing a common affair. Once I take charge, you won't have a prayer. Now that you know me, what will you do? You'll have to decide. It's all up to you. The day you agree to sit in my saddle, the decision is one that no one can straddle. Listen to me and listen well. When you ride with cocaine, you're headed for hell. And that was me. Believe it or not, I checked myself into another rehab called ELM Clinic. I went in there. Somebody was to pick me up. They were late. It was an excuse for me to swing by Standard Bank, got some cash, and went to use. Now 2010, I had stadium. It was World Cup, and I had games. There were games. I had ticket for games, for soccer games and things like that. But it became worse. And I looked for a rehab. I found one in South Coast Recovery Center called South Coast. It started by Mr. Cooper and his wife, and the 7. So they said, "What are you struggling with?" I said, "I'm struggling with crack cocaine." They said, "No, you've got a problem." And when they said, "You've got a problem," I then knew immediately. They said, "How long can you go?" My partners did not know. Remember, I'm working with people, they don't know that I'm using, but they see me shrinking every day. And they're worried. And one of my partners confessed and said, "Chief, we thought no, said 3. And believe it or not, I went to South Coast. A friend of mine picked me up, drove me all the way to South Coast Recovery Center. I spent seven months, very expensive exercise, 18 to 19,000 rands a month. I left everything. I left work. I left my children. Obviously, my marriage had fallen off, and I got some money. I paid my house, paid for my car, paid for my children's school fees for 7 months, and I went away. It's the best 7 months I invested in myself. And I came back 2010. I think it was November. I came out of the clinic. I'm going strong. I've been 3 years, 4 months clean. I stopped counting. I told myself after 3 years I stopped counting. I'm no longer a recovering addict. I'm a normal person. Now, for me, and as I go to my seat and maybe open it up for question and answers, I don't want to belabor your time. There's a book by Jim Collins called From Good to Great. And he talks about brutal honesty. Nothing gives me the pleasure. You know, on Sunday it was my son's birthday, 10 years old. Nothing gives me the pleasure of just taking him out and just chilling with him. Because that's now more important. The money whatever I've lost, I'll gain it all back. It's not an issue. The issue is the impact that I will have in the next generation. So I decided to come out, and when I came out, I went viral. I went to the media and called my friends. I went to all the radio stations and told them I'm coming up with a book called My Journey with Addiction. And I'm brutally and blatantly honest about addiction and what it is. And I've discovered that addiction is a behavioral disorder problem. You lapse in behavior long before you pick up anything. And the thing that I've learned throughout that process is that you do need a mentor. So I went back to my mentor. I got a new mentor. I went crawling on my feet, and he referred me to another mentor, a mentor who's ahead of me, who's a chairman of a company, who's a CEO, who's mentoring me back into health, financial health. So I'll gain it all back. So I thought, let me share with you my life's journey, that in the hopes of sharing it, anytime you find yourself in that situation, trust me when I tell you, the two young boys that I'm mentoring now are actually from Wits University. And the mother called me after seeing me on TV, it's also from Kotema, called me and said, my son is at Wits University. I said, what is he on? Can I meet him? He said, sure. Anytime you call me about somebody who's on addiction, I leave and I drive, I go to them immediately because it's a fatal disease. So I went to him, I went to Wits University, and I asked him a few questions. I discovered that he was not only on crack cocaine, but he was a dealer at the university. So now he had used the supply of the guy because they're helping him, you know. So now cocaine, you will use the supply, you know. And when you use the supply, you deplete it. You owe the person. I don't want to say the Nigerian because there's also South Africans who are pushing drugs, who are drug peddlers. So I don't want to create a stereotype. But eventually, I told his parents. I said, no, take him out of the university. They didn't want to. They didn't believe the problem was that significant. He got scholarship money, 28,000. He blew it, and he was on the roof wanting to kill himself. So they took him out. I took him under my wing. I said, I'm going to mentor him. There are doctors. I've just sent 4 of them to rehabilitation, medical doctors who've been practicing for 9 years. It says scheme of 12 people. They've been on cocaine for the last 9 years. You go to a doctor, you don't know whether he's high or down. And he's using dope on you and things like that. Can you imagine? So whatever you do, you've got to realize that there are pitfalls and potholes that are in front of you. I was at university. I was never given any substance or exposed to that kind of environment. But now everybody is exposed to everything. I was telling a friend of mine yesterday, we were in Sentin, I told him, I said, you know what? I can tell you in this restaurant who's using, who's not. It's almost like we got a code. We can spot each other from far. You know, the minute I say to you, you know, I used to see some, especially some honeys, you know, when I go to the mall, I see it, you know, you want to get wasted. You know, you go to the mall and chill at the mall, and especially a Friday at 4 o'clock, and you check out some crew sitting there, and now and then you go, you know. And anybody who responds like that, you know he's your partner. you know. So you go and introduce yourself. I've got some stash. We can go chill in the car and do a thing. And it's incredible, the addiction that comes with it. So I don't know, you might not be affected, but you might know somebody who's affected. I've just come to say it's important that you have somebody that speaks over your life. It's important that you have somebody that looks after what it is that you do. Because if you're designed for greatness and you're going far, it's imperative, it's absolutely necessary that you have somebody that indeed looks after. Dr. John Maxwell has written a book called 15 Laws of Personal Growth. 4 of them I like. The first law is a law of intentionality. He says growth is intentional. You know, it doesn't just happen in the sky. You have to be intentional about your growth. You know, you have to have a resolution that I want to grow to become something. It was at the university that I knew that I wanted not only to graduate from an institution, but I want to make money and to become a businessman. And I had to put a plan in action. So when growth is intentional, I have to be intentional about growing myself. That's why I say it's not a problem, I'll gain it all back. Because I'm intentional about every second that I spend, every money that I make, everything that I have, I'm intentional about it. Every deal that I cut, I'm intentional about growing. But number 2, he talks about the law of diminishing intent. And he says, the longer you wait from doing something, the more likely that it will not be done. I don't have the time. The third law he talks about is a law of the mirror. And the law of the mirror simply says you've got to see value in yourself in order to add value to yourself. You know you're gifted. Look at your neighbor, say, I'm gifted. I'm gifted. Yes, I'm gifted. You know, you're gifted beyond measure. Yeah, you know, and because you're gifted, unfortunately your gift will not open doors. You have to work the magic to make sure that your gift becomes a reality. You are gifted, so you have to see value in yourself in order to add value to yourself. And the last law, it is a law of self-awareness. The law of self-awareness simply says, Neil Stintard puts it well when he says, until you know who you are, you cannot know what you can become. Please repeat after me. Knowledge, as I take my seat. Can you say knowledge? Knowledge is power. Yes. The more knowledgeable I am, the more dangerous I become. Are you with me? Yeah. You see, when knowledge is power, you know, please repeat after me. Information breeds confidence. Yes. The more informed I am, the more confident I become. That's why if you're in America, there's a guy called Malcolm X. He used to debate. I'm going to my seat. He used to debate, and Malcolm X, when he debates, they asked him a question at the end, and they said, Malcolm, if you were to go back to school, what would you do? And he would debate with professors from Harvard University and things like that. He said, I will kill for an opportunity to go back to school. Because when information breeds confidence, that word information is actually a compound word made out of 2 words, where you get inner and for. And Marcus Garvey, the father of Pan-African thinking, when he says, up you mighty race, you're going to... He talks about information breeds confidence. The more informed I am, the more confident I become. So the law of self-awareness says you need to know who you are and begin to appreciate the destiny of where you come from and recognize that you stand on the shoulders of giants. Oh, I wish I had time. But at the end of the day, remember, if you cannot be a bush, just be a tree. If you cannot be a highway, just be a trail. If you cannot be the sun, just be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you lose. Just be the best of whatever you can be. With God on your side, nothing is impossible. I wish you the best in everything that you do. Thank you.